Thank you, Jan, and I appreciate you both putting this together. So today I'm going to be talking about functions of behavior, but first I'll just do a brief introduction. My name is Ellen Brosh. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I work with Alternative Paths Training School, and I'll talk a little bit more about the organization on the next slide. But I will ask that if you do have questions, feel free to put them into the chat box or hold them for the end, and we'll definitely, with time remaining, address those questions. My co-presenter is Joshua Dixon. He is our community outreach coordinator, and so we'll talk a little bit about what services APTS offers in the community. So just a brief overview, kind of who we are. We both work for Alternative Paths Training Schools. We serve students with disabilities throughout Northern Virginia. Currently, we have 3 campuses, and we serve approximately 200 students. We also provide support.
Ellen, could you speak up a little bit? You sound far from the microphone.
Sure. Is this better?
Well, it came from another person who entered it in the chat.
Okay, give me 1 second. Let me see if I can move my mic. Just. Okay, is this better? Yes. Okay. So again, perfect. Okay, let me know if we have any other technical difficulties, if my screen goes blank. I'm wearing a mask, so if you can't quite hear me, just let me know. So we provide support, again, throughout Northern Virginia, and we also provide support overseas. So I'm going to start with just a brief introduction about what is applied behavior analysis. So the applied behavior analysis is a science that focuses on relations between behavior and environmental events. So as individuals, we all engage in behaviors. Some of those behaviors are good. For example, saying hi, raising your hand if you're a student in school. And some of those behaviors are behaviors that we don't necessarily want to see. So for some students that we work with, that could be hitting. For adults, that might be showing up late for work. And so what applied behavior analysis does is looks at what's occurring in the environment that might cause those behaviors to continue. The most important thing is that we focus on why the behaviors are occurring. So we care what they look like because that helps us talk about things. But if we want to change behavior, then we have to understand why it's occurring. So if you're a parent or a teacher or an employer, and you have a student or a child or an employee who's engaging in a behavior that you might not want to see, according to applied behavior analysis, the only way to change that behavior is to figure out why are they doing it? What's causing that behavior to continue? So there's always a discrepancy between form versus function, and that's what I just talked about. So form, what does a behavior look like? If you've ever worked with a behavior analyst, they are going to come in and they are going to ask, what is your student doing? What is your child doing? Are they spitting? Are they hitting? Are they just not cooperating with your instructions? But then they're going to conduct assessments, and they're going to try to determine, why is that behavior continuing to occur? And for those of you that are, everyone's been affected by COVID, whether you have individuals that are students that are participating in virtual learning, you're trying to work from home, and your kids are engaging in virtual learning. I'm sure that a lot of new behaviors have popped up because it's a trying time for everyone. So when we talk about the function, the why, what does engaging in that behavior get the person? So if it's a student and they rip up their papers, what are they getting from their environment that's causing that to continue? They're continuing to rip up their papers. And so the presentation is going to focus on some whys, some possible reasons that individuals might engage in some of those behaviors that we don't necessarily want to see, and then focus on how could we change those behaviors. So according to applied behavior analysis, there's 4 reasons that we engage in behavior, both good behaviors and what I'll call bad behaviors we want to decrease. And this is applicable whether you're adult, this is applicable whether you're a student, this is applicable whether you're neurotypically developing or whether you may have a disability of some sort. But applied behavior analysis focuses on the aspect that behavior occurs either to get out of things, which we call escape, to gain attention from someone, to gain access to an item or to an activity. And then there's also because it just feels good, which we'll call automatic or otherwise known as sensory reinforcement. And in the subsequent slides, we're going to break those down. We're going to talk about what each of those functions looks like, as well as how you might address those functions. But before we do that, we're going to talk a little bit about how you might identify what the function of the behavior is.
All right, so this slide says identify the function easy as ABC. So in applied behavior analysis, we use the ABC method as a part of our functional behavior assessment, which is an assessment that is, it's a number of different assessments essentially that go into figuring out what the function of the behavior is. So like the slide says, we start with antecedent. So this is what happens before the behavior, what the person actually does, and consequence, and that's what happens immediately after. So for instance, let's say that you're walking in a grocery store and somebody is like fumbling with their bags a little bit and they drop their keys. Let's say that you go and reach for those keys to pick them up and give them back to them. Now, if you go ahead and give those keys back to that person and they are so grateful, they're like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. The consequence of what you did was that you got some praise, like you got some social interaction, some positive social interaction. So in the future, you're probably going to be more likely to go ahead and pick up someone's keys when they drop them. But let's say that you go ahead and you pick up those keys for somebody and they say, why are you touching my stuff? Like, get away from my stuff, things like that. You get a negative social reaction. And that might kind of deter you from wanting to pick up people's keys in the future. So in this ABC method, the consequence is really, kind of what we look at to see if a behavior is likely or less likely to occur in the future.
Sure, and one other thing I'll add is, and the virtual format's a little bit different. Normally we try to be a little bit more interactive, and I would ask if anyone's worked with a behavior analyst. But one key with these ABCs, the antecedent, behavior, and consequence, is that they need to be observable events. So as a behavior analyst, a lot of times I'll work with a teacher or a parent, and I'll say, well, what happened right before the student hit you? And the response will be, well, he got angry. Well, we can't necessarily see angry. That's something internal, that's an emotional response. So I'll ask another question. Well, what happened before the student got angry? Well, we gave him a math worksheet. That's an observable event. So if you've ever worked with a behavior analyst, or you plan on working with one in the future, they're really going to ask these pressing questions. And it's because they really want to know, what are those observable events? What can we see in the environment? Because ultimately, if we can't see it, we can't change it.
Okay, so we're going to go over antecedent a little more. So the antecedent is an environmental event that occurred prior to a behavior. So in terms of like our students or our clients, this could be direction, transition, or ending an activity. So kind of like Ellen was saying, when working with a behavior analyst, let's say that, the behavior is whenever you give your student a math worksheet, they rip it up, right? Or you tell them to work on their math worksheet, they rip it up. What happened before they started ripping it up? They got their math worksheet or they got that direction. So that is what the antecedent would be in that case. Or another example would be like transition. So maybe it's from a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity. that transition, or honestly just the difference in environment, can also be an antecedent to a behavior. Um, so what is a behavior? Any action of an individual, interaction between a person and their environment. Everyone engages in behavior: talking, eating, yelling, or hitting, and all behaviors serve a purpose. So when we're thinking of behavior, there's something in applied behavior analysis that it's said time and time again. It's called the dead man's test. So if a dead man can do it, it is not behavior. Um, so that means, can a dead man raise their hand or wave? No. Um, so that's kind of the rule of thumb when we're thinking of behavior. It's exactly like Ellen said. It needs to be observable, and we need to be able to see it to be able to kind of understand what's going on there in terms of function.
Sure. And I'll tell you, one of the responses sometimes I get from teachers or parents, and I'm sure if you have kids at home right now and you're in the midst of virtual learning plus trying to work from home, I'm sure your children never engage in annoying behaviors. Absolutely not. But that's one of the responses that I'm getting a little bit of right now from parents. Well, he's just being annoying. And so my question, well, what is he doing? And again, I'm sure no one's ever experienced this. He's interrupting me every 5 minutes. He keeps asking me for a snack. He keeps telling me he's bored. And that's what a behavior analyst is going to ask. Exactly what do you mean by annoying? Well, he's interrupting you. He's asking for snacks. He's, repeatedly saying he's bored. Or it could be more severe. He's hitting me. He's destroying the house. These are just all examples. But it's just so important to really break it down, again, because if we can't see it, we can't change it.
And in terms of that, that child is more than likely looking for attention. And that's why they are engaging in these behaviors that, may seem annoying or more intense than usual, because especially in this virtual environment that we're all living in, the need for these kids to gain that attention, they're obviously not getting as much because they're not going to school, they're not going out in the environment as much. So it's pretty normal to see behaviors like that happen right now because of everything that's going on. Okay, so we're gonna move on to consequences. Now again, like I stated before, consequences is obviously the last step in the ABC method, and that is the part of the method that will determine whether or not that behavior is more likely to occur or less likely to occur in the future. So what did others do in response to the behavior? So let's say that the function of the behavior is to escape a task, is to get out of that math worksheet that I brought up earlier. If every time you hand a student a math worksheet and they rip it up, and I mean, in itself, that is getting out of that task. The consequence of ripping that up, if not presented with another worksheet right away, is, they got out of that task. So they kind of got what they wanted out of that. What did the student get from the behavior? Exactly like I said, they got out of the task. What changes occurred in the environment due to the behavior? Again, in that same example, what changed is they no longer have to do their math. If you go ahead and represent another math worksheet every time they rip one up, the consequence of ripping that behavior up is, or ripping that math worksheet up is, another math worksheet. So it's kind of that this is the part of the ABC method that really determines what we're going to see in terms of that behavior.
Sure. And one other thing I'll add is a question I get a lot, especially for individuals that haven't worked with behavior analysts in the past, or individuals that might be trying to implement this themselves, whether you work in a group home, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, is how long do I need to observe? How long do I need to look for antecedents? How long do I need to look for consequences? Or they ask me, hey, I have a behavior analyst, but they're just coming into my classroom and sitting in the back. And that's actually an appropriate assessment method for the behavior analyst. But when it comes to how long you should look at it, if it's a behavior that's occurring nonstop throughout the day, you might be able to quickly identify what's occurring before and what's happening after. But if it's a behavior that's less frequent, so it only occurs maybe once a day or twice a day, then the behavior analyst might have to observe for an extended period of time. So really that length or duration of observation is going to vary depending on how frequently the student, the adult, the individual is displaying some of those, what we call maladaptive behaviors, the behaviors that we would like to decrease. So right now I'm going to identify typically the 5 steps that you would implement when trying to decrease a maladaptive behavior or a behavior that you don't want to see. And then after I talk about each of these steps, we're going to go back to those 4 functions: escape, attention, access, and sensory. And we're going to talk about what those functions look like. And then we're going to discuss effective or possible interventions for dealing with those functions. And I know that individuals have a lot of probably maladaptive behavior, whether it's in a work setting, because you might be working with clients that are used to going out in the community and now they can't. So you might be seeing some increases in maladaptive behaviors. Or if you're a parent and you have students that are used to leaving the house 5 days a week to participate in school or go to extracurricular activities, you might be seeing some increases in maladaptive behaviors in the home. So I'll try to use some examples that I think might be applicable. But again, please use that chat box or save your questions for the end. So when addressing problem behavior, again, the first thing you want to do is identify that why. Why are they doing it? Is my child doing it because they want me to talk to them? Are they engaging in that behavior because they don't want to do their virtual learning? And once we find that why, that reason that they're continuing to do it, which we call a reinforcer, we don't want to provide it. So if we know that during virtual learning, they are putting their head down on their desk. Oh, I'm so bored. Oh, I'm so bored. We need to not deliver that escape. Let them have a break. The third is we want to teach them an alternative response. So what can they do to access that? If they want a break, can we teach them to say, hey, can I take a break? Can we teach them to touch a break card on their desk? Or do we teach them that once you complete this task or work for a specific period of time, then you get a break? So we want to make sure that they're not getting what they want for the bad behavior, rather they're getting what they want when they engage in an appropriate response. We want to make sure we teach and reinforce that appropriate response. If you're 5 years old and it's your first time walking into a kindergarten classroom, students don't automatically know to raise their hand to get attention. So we have to teach it. And I think regardless of the population we serve, we always assume that we have to teach the skill and not necessarily that they are purposefully doing it. So it's so important to teach and reinforce or reward that alternative response. And then the fifth one is anticipate and work to prevent problem behavior. There's a lot of things we can do before bad or problem behavior occurs. We can modify the environment, we can make changes to the schedule, because once the student or the individual is already engaging in those bad behaviors, obviously the environment has already been disrupted and you're in a difficult scenario. So I'm also going to identify some strategies on how you can structure either a client's school day, a student's school day, your child's school day, to decrease the likelihood that they do engage in those problem behaviors. So the first one I'm going to talk about is managing problem behavior maintained by escape or avoidance. So this is typically where I would ask, for some examples, but again, due to the virtual format, I'm just going to give some examples. So this might be a student who every time you tell them to write a sentence, they hit you. Or every time you tell your child that they need to make their bed, they try to run out the door. Or every time you tell your employee that they have to do a specific training, they call out or they don't show up to work that day. So what we would look at as that's escape maintained. They're engaging in these behaviors because they don't want to do it. And don't get me wrong, everyone engages in escape maintained behaviors. If Josh asked me, hey Ellen, I'm moving on Saturday. I live in a 4-bedroom house. Can you help me move my furniture? Oh, I'm feeling a little sick. I'm not sick. I realized during COVID that's not, I shouldn't have said, but you know, we all engage in escape maintained behavior, right? Whether that's to get out of something you don't want to do, or whether it's your child trying to avoid making their bed or doing their math worksheet. So what do? You know your child's doing it, or you know your employee or your client or the individual is doing it because they don't want to complete that activity or that task. The other thing that I just want to emphasize is, what is a demand? A demand can be anything that you ask or tell someone to do. Some people might enjoy writing, right? A lot of people keep a diary, keep a journal. Writing for them is not a negative task or a task they don't want to complete. But for another individual, writing could be the worst thing in the world. So when we think about what is a demand, it's not necessarily thinking about the typical ones, homework or chores. For some individuals, simply talking to someone is a demand. They would prefer to kind of keep to themselves, engage in their own activities. So keep in mind that when you're thinking about what is a demand, it varies across individuals. And even some things that can be perceived as fun, think about it. A lot of people that prefer to stay home in the evenings, going to a party at night is aversive. So they might say they're sick, or they might say their car broke down. So a demand can be anything. Again, I already mentioned this. It can be a recreational activity that the student usually enjoys. So a lot of individuals love physical education class, right? You get to run around, you get to scream, you get to play with your friends. But maybe it's hot out, and that particular student doesn't want to engage in physical education because it's hot out. Or maybe your child is in virtual learning and they love group reading. And every single day, they're eager to log into group reading. But you find every once in a while, they don't want to. And maybe it's because on that particular day, their best friend isn't in the group, or it's a different instructor. So again, it can vary based on the other circumstances of the demand. It can be interacting or talking to you, and they can engage, again, someone can engage in a problem behavior to escape or avoid anything that they don't like doing at that particular time. So first I want to talk about what should you not do. So I'll use a particular example. I know a lot of students are participating in virtual learning right now. So you have a student at home that's, let's say, maybe throwing toys in the house every time it's time to do virtual learning. So if they threw a toy, you do not want to remove the demands. So you don't want to say, okay, you threw the toy, so now you don't have to do your task. All the students learned is, well, if I throw my toy, I don't have to do the task. And a lot of times what I see is the student will say, hey, mom, I don't feel like doing this. And then you'll see an escalate, and mom will say, no, you need to. You need to complete this task. And then the student will say, I don't want to, and it'll escalate. You'll see crying, you'll see screaming, you'll see some property destruction. Then you might even see some physical aggression. And at the physical aggression point, that's when the parent walks away. It's too much, and I understand that. But what the child has learned is when I asked appropriately, I didn't get a break. When I cried, I didn't get a break. When I destroyed property, I didn't get a break. But when I hit mom, I got a break. And the next time the child has that opportunity, most likely they're going to go straight to the most intense behavior. They're going to engage in physical aggression to get that break. So I understand that sometimes behaviors escalate to the point that in the moment you can't necessarily manage it, but just keep in mind that when you do deliver that break or that reward, the behavior that occurred right before it most likely will continue to occur in the future. The other thing, don't reduce demands that are already placed on a student. So if I'm working with a child and there's 5 math problems on their worksheet and I say, you have to do the whole worksheet, and then they hit me and I say, okay, never mind, you only have to do 3. Again, the child has learned that if I hit, I don't have to do the whole task. And again, we're going to talk on a subsequent slide how to set them up for success. But we don't want to reduce the demand. We don't want to use timeout or going to the principal's office. Imagine if you're a student at a public school setting and you don't want to complete your math worksheet. So you yell at your teacher or you yell at another student. And next thing you know, you get sent out of the classroom to the principal's office. So not only have you avoided or escaped your task, but you're also getting attention from what's considered the most powerful person in the school. So again, an example I'll use is if your student is at home doing virtual learning and they're continuing to escalate, and you say, well, fine, you don't have to do it, but when dad gets home, you're going to have to meet with dad. Well, for that particular child, again, not only are they escaping or avoiding the task they don't want to do, but now they get some one-on-one attention with dad. And maybe for that particular child, talking to dad, even if it's talking about bad stuff like not doing your work, that's still more rewarding than completing the worksheet. So again, it's something to keep in mind when you're trying to work with students in the school, children at home, adult clients that you might serve. And if the student has already started engaging in maladaptive behavior or those problem behaviors, do not offer a reward after the fact. So if I say, Josh, it's time to do your worksheet, and he starts it and then he starts screaming, and I say, well, Josh, if you sit quietly for the rest of your worksheet, you can play video games. Well, again, what happens is I offered the reward right after he screamed. I didn't offer it when he started to complete his workshop or his worksheet. So again, what behavior is most likely to occur? The screaming. What I should have done is offered him the video games when he started to complete his work, or even before he started to complete his work. So those are some of the do nots. What should you do? If you implement a demand, if you say do your math worksheet or write your spelling or make your bed or wash your dishes, whatever it is, you want to make sure you follow through. Follow through on all demands. One thing we always emphasize, especially if you're a teacher in the school, it's so easy to say things like, do you want to do your math worksheet? Now, my boss isn't here, and if my boss came up to me and said, Ellen, do you want to work today? What am I going to say? No. So when we're working with, again, students, children, adults, the things they have to do, phrase it as a demand. It's time to do your math. Sometimes they're going to have options. Do you want to do math first or do you want to do spelling? But our language is so important, especially when you're working with an individual who cognitively might not understand idiosyncratic behavior. So verbal behavior or facial expressions. You have to be very clear with the language you use. Sometimes it's an option and sometimes it's not. It's not an option. So make sure that you state it. It's time to do math, and then follow through on it. So there's two primary interventions. One, simply to keep the demand, keep repeating the demand until it's completed. So please pick up your pencil. And typically we'll wait 30 seconds. Please pick up your pencil. Now imagine the comparison is if your alarm clock only beeped once, maybe twice in the morning, who would have made it to this presentation in the morning? Not me, right? The goal is to be kind of a broken alarm clock. It's time to complete, your task or pick up your pencil. Once they do it, you can deliver all that positive praise. Great job picking up your pencil. Thank you so much. The second intervention is to model the appropriate response. So pick up your pencil. Pick up your pencil like this and demonstrate how you would pick up a pencil. And this is so important because I think sometimes we assume People know how to do things. If I asked the audience, if I handed you a golf club and I said, swing this golf club the correct way, I don't know how many people are out there are golfers, but if you're not, then you're not going to swing it correctly. And if all I kept doing was say, swing the golf club correctly, you would never get it right. Imagine how frustrating that would be. So sometimes you're going to have to model things to make sure that the student or the client or the child understands exactly what you're asking, especially students that might have some hearing deficits or some vision problems. Modeling that response, giving them two modes of communication is so important. And last but not least, you always want to be prepared for an extinction burst. What that means is when you start carrying out that demand, most likely you're going to see an escalation in behaviors. And one of the real world examples I always give is a snack machine. The snack machines where you put the quarter in the snack machine and then you hit A1 and the little thing turns and the bag of chips falls down. Now, maybe this has never happened to you, but it happens to me. I feel like 99% of the time that I use a snack machine. Now it's about $1.75, right? It's not a quarter anymore, but I put $1.75 in and I put A1 and my Lay's potato chips start to fall and then they get stuck, right? Happens on most snack machines. So I might start by just kind of tapping on it or hitting A1 even harder. Next, I might bang the snack machine. Next thing you know, I'm going to rock it back and forth. I might even try to reach my hand up into the snack machine to pull down my Lay's potato chips. But eventually it's not going to work and I'm simply going to walk away. Now, with a student, they might have a history of, well, typically if I yell, I get sent to the principal's office. Or if I yell, mom tells me to go to my room and calm down. But now she's not letting me do that. Now she's saying, Josh, please pick up your pencil. So that particular child might escalate. He might scream. He might scream louder. He might curse. He might say some other things that are inappropriate. He might try to throw his pencil. But eventually, over time, with consistency, he'll learn, oh, I don't get to go to my room or I don't get to talk to dad later if I yell or scream or throw my pencil. I get to do those things when I cooperate with mom's expectations. So one thing I always emphasize, whether you're a parent at home, whether you work in a adult group home, or whether you're a teacher, there are going to be situations where it's unsafe for the student or for others in the area to continue to try to work through that behavior, to continue to keep that demand on them. So if they do have to be relocated due to a safety issue, make sure when they return, once they're calm, return them to the area where the task is and have them cooperate with that instruction. Again, the key here is we don't want individuals to learn that the bad behavior, the problem behavior, gets them out of things. It's those cooperation behaviors, that appropriately raising your hand or requesting a break or showing up at work and completing all your activities. That's what eventually gets you a break. So one of the key steps that I mentioned is, well, how do we prevent it? I know every time my child, it's time to do his math, he throws his pencil. How do you prevent it? Ellen, all you've given me is how do I respond to it? But ultimately, we don't even want it to happen, right? We don't want to have to keep that demand on and work through those problem behaviors. So let's identify what Josh, for example, can do. Okay, Josh, I know every time I give you math, you yell at me or you throw your pencil because you want a break. So now what am I going to teach you? I'm going to teach you how to calmly ask for a break. So if Josh is verbal, I might teach him, hey, Josh, if you need a break, say break. Maybe they can just ask, hey, I need to stop. I need quiet time. Maybe it's touching a break card. So there's tons of alternative behaviors that you can teach a student to request a break. And a lot of times when I present this to parents or to teachers or to other individuals, they say, well, he needs to learn to do his activities. He just needs to learn to cooperate. And one thing I always emphasize is it is a life skill to learn to ask for a break. As adults, as older individuals, and even as children, right? There's going to be situations that are overwhelming There's going to be situations that you just can't handle in the moment, maybe for other circumstances that are going on, and you just need a break. And so what I always emphasize is think of it as a life skill. Yes, in the moment, learning to write the letter A or learning to do addition might seem more important, but so is that skill of asking for a break. And typically what we do with students at our school or individuals we work with in the community is when they ask for a break, at first, every single time we say, yes, you can have a break, because we want to make that easy. We want to make that the easiest way to get that break. And then over time, once they've developed that skill, then we will decrease how many times they can have a break. Okay, well, first you need to complete 3 problems, then you can have a break. Notice I'm setting it up beforehand. I'm not reducing the demand once it's already in place. Or once you write 3 sentences, or once you make your bed, you can have a break. So again, at first, we want to reward every appropriate request for a break. But over time, we want to decrease how many times we do that. And one other thing I always emphasize is you can always use visuals like a break card or a timer. And again, this is a life skill, because I don't know how many times you guys, when you're at work, look at your watch or look at your iPhone or look at some other timing device. That's a visual stimuli for adults. The clock tells us when we can take a break. So why wouldn't we offer that same courtesy, even if it's not a clock? Maybe it's some other visual, a visual schedule, something on the student's desk, to our students or to our clients or to, our children in the home. So as I mentioned, you want to identify that behavior. So for example, it could be cooperation, and then you want to provide a lot of praise and reinforcement. So you want to, great job completing your math worksheet, great job making your bed, great job writing your name, whatever it is. We want to make sure that we're really lathering on the praise for the good behavior, the behavior we want to see. And if you're working with a behavior analyst, or maybe you're a teacher working with a behavior specialist in the school, or you're working with different clients, ideally you want to develop and implement a behavior plan to reinforce cooperation. But a lot of individuals that attend workshops, they say, well, I don't work with a behavior analyst. What am I supposed to do, Ellen? What are you talking about? A behavior plan. So what I'll say is, really what we're looking at is consistent responses. So if you're working with your child in the home, make sure that mom's response is consistent with dad's response, which is consistent maybe with if grandma's there. We want to make sure that everyone working with that particular client or everyone working with your child or your student has a consistent response. And a lot of times that's where a behavior plan is advantageous, because it spells out those steps. But if you don't have a behavior analyst working with you, again, it's just so important that everyone responds to that particular child in the same fashion, in the same manner. So again, how do you prevent it? We know how to respond to it, don't allow that escape, but what are some other methods to prevent the likelihood that they engage in those behaviors? In the particular situation, remind them how to request a break. Hey, we're about to do math, but if you need a break, just raise your hand and say that you need a break, or just touch this break card. Remind them what they get. So as soon as we complete this math worksheet, you're going to get to go outside and play with the basketball or throw the football with your brother. And then remind them of the consequence. Hey, if you don't finish this math worksheet, at 11 o'clock, your brother gets to go outside and play basketball. You won't get that opportunity. So finish your math worksheet now. Again, I'm making it sound easy. It's not nearly as easy as what I'm saying, but the most important thing is to be consistent. Be consistent with how you set that student up for success, and be consistent with how you implement those consequences. So I talked about do not reduce the demand after the student has already engaged in some of those problem behaviors, but you can reduce the demand ahead of time. So if I know 5 math problems is too overwhelming, or writing a whole paragraph is too overwhelming, or for some people or children, even writing their whole name is overwhelming, I'm going to break it down ahead of time. Why am I going to set that student up for failure? I'm not. So before I give them that task or that worksheet, I'm going to tell them, hey, you only have to do 3 questions out of these 10. In fact, you can pick any 3 questions. Or I might even say, hey, you can start by writing the J in your name. Just write that J. Great job. Now write the O, right? It seems small, but again, that's where a demand varies. Writing a name might seem simple to you, but it might seem overwhelming to a child that has a lot of difficulty with writing their name. And you can provide a lot of choice. And if for those parents that are participating in virtual learning with their children in the home, I know that sometimes the schedule's set in stone, but other times there's going to be so many opportunities to give your child a choice. So you only have to finish 5 of the questions right now, or you can write with a pen or a pencil, or maybe you can have pink paper as opposed to white paper. Really be creative, because choice makes a huge difference proactively in decreasing the likelihood of maladaptive behavior. So sometimes they might have homework assignments. Which one do you want to do first? Most of us are able to set up our workday how we want it. We don't necessarily, we have a list of tasks and we can choose which ones we do first. Now imagine if your boss came in and kind of micromanage you. Okay, nope, you have to do this first and then this and then this. Now don't get me wrong, there's going to be circumstances where that is appropriate, where everyone needs some micromanagement and you have to do tasks in a specific fashion. But that's not all the time. So the same way as adults, we get choices at work. To the extent you can, try to give your children choices in the home. So again, how do we prevent it? Identify what's aversive. Teach in a way that escape is not as valuable. So we want to make sure, again, you get a longer break or you get a better reward for cooperating and completing the task. One thing is increased fluency. And what I mean by that is no one necessarily likes to do things that they're bad at. I used golf as an example. I picked up golf a little while ago. I'm bad at it. So when I go out there, I might play a hole and then I want to go home, right? No one likes to do things they're bad at. So our students don't necessarily like to do things where they consistently make mistakes, right? No one likes to get consistent negative feedback. So if you know that maybe that's an area where they're not as strong, focus on it. Start small, start with small sections, and improve their skills. And then you can also just schedule in breaks. So you know typically after 10 minutes or 15 minutes or maybe an hour, your child or your client or your student starts to get a little off task. You know, maybe it starts with spinning their pencil, or maybe it starts with just kind of staring off in space, not completing the task. Then at that 30-minute mark, regardless of what's going on, just say, here's your break, right? Because they can always come back and finish it. But once they've already started to escalate, once they've already started to engage in those problem behaviors, if you give them a break then, again, what we talked about earlier, you've just rewarded those problem behaviors.
All right, so we're going to move on to managing problem behavior maintained by attention. Now, when we're talking about problem behavior maintained by attention, the main thing we need to remember here is, where do we need to provide this attention? Where we provide the attention is determined, or that will determine where we see the behavior. So if we provide attention after, a maladaptive behavior, that's exactly what the student or, child or whoever wanted. If we provide attention, after they're doing something appropriate, then they'll be more likely to do that in the future if that's what they're looking for. All right. So if you're not giving attention before problem behavior, don't give attention for at least 10 seconds after problem behavior stops. So let's say that, somebody is hitting their head, right? Let's say they're hitting their head. This is, scrap that example. Let's move down here. So pretend not to notice problem behavior, no eye contact. Don't redirect, argue with, or counsel the student. Be prepared for an extinction burst. So don't redirect, argue with, or counsel the student. Right there, we are giving the attention for that problem behavior. if, every time someone is yelling out in class, if we go ahead and directly attend to it right away, that's how they have determined that they will receive the most attention. And what's important here to remember is we don't ignore, we don't pretend. So it says pretend not to notice problem behavior. We're not ignoring the student, but we are ignoring that behavior that they are engaging in if they are trying to get attention from it.
Sure. And one thing I'll emphasize too is a lot of times when I talk to, again, parents, teachers, other providers that work with clients, is they tell me the behavior just occurred out of nowhere. He or she had everything they wanted. I was sitting at my desk working, and the child had snacks, and they had toys, and they had their phone, and they had video games on. They didn't have anything they had to do. It just occurred out of nowhere. Next thing you know, my kids are fighting with each other, or he's running out the front door, or he's getting into something he or she shouldn't. Well, what's missing there? They have everything they want, toys, video games. They don't have any demands. What's missing is your attention. So a lot of times when I hear that, when people tell me it came out of nowhere, it didn't necessarily come out of nowhere. It came at a time that they weren't receiving attention. So keep that in mind. If you think your child or students or someone else's behavior is coming out of nowhere, ask yourself, were they receiving attention from anyone prior to that behavior occurring? And one other thing that Josh mentioned that is so important that I just want to emphasize is we are not saying ignore your student or ignore your child. We're saying ignore the behavior that you don't want to see. Always continue to monitor for health and safety. So if your child is throwing items or your student's throwing items, we still want you to remain in close proximity to them. We want you to keep them safe. We don't want them to access something they shouldn't, but we're not going to say anything. We're not going to say stop throwing or stop hitting, because that's drawing attention to that behavior. We still want to monitor for health and safety and be in close proximity to intervene in a timely manner if we need to.
All right. So for moderate to severe disruptive behavior, we want to monitor for health and safety, but minimize attention to the problem behavior. And we want to use a neutral face and neutral voice. So back to the example that I started a second ago. If a student is, let's say they're lightly tapping their head. If we go ahead and provide attention for that, they're going to know every time they lightly tap their head, they're going to receive that attention. So what it says here is we're monitoring for health and safety, but we don't want to give attention to these problem behaviors. I can sit here and lightly tap my head all day. I might have a headache, but I'm not going to really cause that much damage to my head, So that's very important when trying to distinguish when you should provide attention or not.
And I'm going to throw one other thing in there just about using a neutral face and a neutral voice. I don't know if growing up, anyone that's participating in this workshop ever had a mom or a grandmother or a teacher or someone that would quote unquote give them the look, kind of those eyes. I don't know if any of you guys know what I'm talking about, but I definitely had a grandmother that would give me the look. And at first it worked because I knew that meant stop. I knew when I got the look, but then over time, I can remember my sisters and I thought the look was funny. So we would actually continue to do what we shouldn't be doing to get, again, quote unquote, the look. So when you're managing problem behavior, that look might be effective at first, but eventually it's going to wear off because the look has no consequences other than giving that individual attention. So always use that neutral face and that neutral voice. I typically am a pretty calm demeanor, but when the individual I'm working with is doing well, you better believe I'm smiling and I have a positive affect and I'm really, articulating my voice. But when they're doing things that I don't want them to do, my voice changes from something like this to please pick up your pencil. Please pick up your pencil. So there's a huge difference in the level of attention I'm giving them. One is you're doing great. I really appreciate it. Two, this isn't very fun. but I can use my other voice when you start to cooperate, right? So keep that in mind. And if those of you that are using the look or know someone that's used the look in the past, again, it might be effective at first, but over time, you might see a decrease in how that works.
All right, so just to kind of reiterate a few things, do not make eye contact or talk to student when they are engaging in this behavior that is maintained by attention. Because simply by making that eye contact, or, just kind of how like Ellen said, the look, that can be enough attention for a behavior to be maintained and to occur again. Do not attend to any problem behavior. Again, this goes back to monitoring health and safety, obviously. But if I'm lightly tapping my head, we don't necessarily need to address that right away. We can ignore that behavior. And when they stop tapping their head and they raise their hand, we want to give them that attention. Oh yeah, what's going on? What do you need? Do not counsel student. Same thing with that example. If they're tapping their head, coming over and saying, "Oh no, are you okay?" Or like, "What? Like, let's talk. Let's talk about this. Like, why are you like tapping your head, or why are you hitting your head?" That's enough attention to maintain that behavior as well. And again, we do want to monitor student to ensure they are safe. If that student is still, tapping their head, but it starts to get aggressive, then of course we do have to intervene because number one thing we want to make sure we're doing is keeping our students and the people that we're working with safe.
And one thing I'll emphasize is a common question I get from parents is, well, about the counseling, but I need to tell them why it's bad. I need to tell them why they shouldn't tear up their toys, or I need to tell them why they shouldn't hit their brother, or I need to tell them why they shouldn't, run out into the road. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely a time and a place to provide that rationale. When the student first engages in it, if they're older and they can understand, first then and reasons, absolutely give them that reason. But if you've been doing that over and over and over, ask yourself, you know what? I think they've got an understanding because they're kind of answering my own questions when I say, do you remember why you shouldn't hit your brother? Yes, Mom. It's because it hurts him. Ask yourself, well, maybe they're doing it to get my attention because he knows or she knows all the answers, right? I mean, if you have an employee that's showing up tardy every day, you might tell them at first, you can't show up tardy. It really makes it difficult on the other employees. You're not as productive. We don't meet our deadlines. But you're only going to do that once as an employer. After that, you're going to change your consequences, right? Because eventually, telling them every day why they can't be tardy isn't going to be effective. So again, there's a time and a place for counseling or providing that rationale, but kind of ask yourself, can he or she tell me why they shouldn't do it? And if they can, then most likely they're continuing to engage in those behaviors, not because they don't understand the consequences, but because, hey, this is one-on-one time with my teacher or the principal or mom or dad. I get 5 minutes where she just talks to me or he just talks to me while my brother over there is doing something else. This is great. Plus, I'm at home all day anyway. I'm a little bit bored. So, hey, this is 5 minutes of me getting to talk to mom or dad or grandma or someone else, and it passes the day. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about counseling or providing a rationale.
All right. So we're going to want to provide extra attention when the student or whoever you're working with engages in appropriate behavior. And we want to teach alternative behaviors to request that attention. We want to make sure that these alternative behaviors that we teach are far more reinforcing than the maladaptive behaviors they were engaging in before. So, a classic example that's on here is, teaching the alternative behavior of raising your hand compared to yelling out in class. A student for years might yell out in class, and the teacher may, say, Johnny, like, we don't yell out in class. Well, you know what? That's the attention that he wanted. He wanted the attention of the teacher. So as the years go on, you're going to want to teach Johnny how to raise his hand. when he does raise his hand, we want the teacher to give, tenfold attention to that. You know, tons of praise, like, oh, great job raising your hand. Like, what do you need? Like, do you want to answer the question? All this stuff. And like it says on the slide as well, initially reinforce with attention and praise every appropriate request for attention. So like at first, when he is first learning to raise his hand, every single time he raises his hand, we're going to want to give him as much attention as possible.
Sure. And again, one other thing I'll talk about is when I work with a lot of parents, they're like, hey, or teachers, my child knows how to request attention. My child knows how to say, excuse me, or can you help me, or raise their hand. But then they say, but he's not doing it. He's not doing it. And I know he has those skills. Instead, he's throwing his paper, or he's hitting his brother, or he's running out of the classroom. So what I would say is currently what's easier, because a lot of times what happened is the perpetrator gets most of the attention, right? The individual that's engaging in those bad behaviors is the quickest way to get attention. So I can raise my hand. I'm raising it. If you guys could see me, I'm literally raising my hand. But I'm raising my hand, but the teacher keeps teaching, or mom keeps talking to dad, and I'm raising my hand. But then as soon as I hit my brother, mom and dad look over at me and say, Josh, stop hitting your brother. So the appropriate behavior didn't get a reaction, but hitting the problem behavior not only got a reaction, but got a reaction so quickly. So what we want to do is kind of hit the reset button. And I get that during virtual learning, especially if you're a parent that's working from home, this might be an ongoing issue. Your child might constantly be interrupting you while you're in a Google meeting or a team meeting, or one of the many formats of meetings. So if you can figure out a way to quickly respond, because you're going to have to respond anyway. If you're going to have to respond when they hit their brother, or they throw their items, or they're doing something else in the house that might be destructive or dangerous, you're going to have to respond. So see if you can make it in your schedule that you are able to respond quicker for the appropriate request, for the, hey, excuse me, mom. Even if you need to say, hey, great job getting my attention. I will be with you in 5 minutes or 3 minutes, or whatever's an appropriate wait period for that particular student. But just keep in mind that they might have the skills, but if those bad behaviors get your attention quicker, they're going to use those every time.
All right, so we're going to want to identify situations when the problem behavior is likely to occur. We can go back to the hand raising example. Let's say that you're a teacher and you do some reading, right? And every time after reading, you're going to ask questions to the class. And typically this is where that student would yell out the answer or yell out to get some form of attention. So right then, we need to identify, like, okay, this is when we see this behavior a lot, and that's going to help us out a lot. Because then, before that reading, we're able to remind the student prior to the situation how to obtain attention appropriately. So, before reading, we can talk to Johnny and we can say, hey, we're going to do reading, we're going to do questions. I want to remind you to please raise your hand if you would like to say something. And also, we want to provide a lot of attention before that as well. If he's doing anything appropriate, even if it's like, hey, you're sitting in your chair quietly, thank you, like I really appreciate that, or you're doing a great job, like doing your math worksheet before we get to reading today. So we also want to make sure appropriate attention getting methods work faster than the inappropriate ones, like I had mentioned. So as soon as he raises his hand after reading, we're going to call on him if that's the appropriate method to get attention there. And we want to spend time the way they want to spend time. So let's say after we do reading, he raises his hand a few times, doesn't yell out. We're going to want to reinforce him the way that he wants to be reinforced. We're going to ask him what he wants to do because he acted appropriately during that time.
Sure. And one other thing I'll talk about is the last point about spend the way they want to spend time. And I'll use a real world example. I have a wonderful brother-in-law who has my nieces, two girls, very young, age 6 and 4, and they are so into makeup right now. Fake makeup, real makeup. They want to pretend do nails. And my brother-in-law, again, wonderful father. He's just really into sports. He's not used to this girl stuff. He was raised with 4 brothers. He's not used to painting nails and makeup. And I was over at their house the other day, and the girls wanted to play makeup, and my brother-in-law said, "Hey guys, what if we throw the baseball?" And the kids acquiesced to their dad's request, and they went outside and they throw the baseball once, and next thing you know, one of my nieces is just running across the street, right? So my brother-in-law was like, "I'm giving him attention." Yeah, but it's not the attention that they want, right? They didn't necessarily want you to throw them the baseball. They wanted you to paint their nails. And I get that there's going to be circumstances or environmental reasons why in the moment you can't spend time the way that the child wants to spend time. But keep that in mind. You might think like, "Hey, I'm giving my child attention. We're playing with Barbies, or we're throwing the baseball, or we're talking." But that might not be the actual attention that they're seeking. And again, you're not always going to be able to do this just based on, the things that happen in the home. But to the extent you can, try to spend time the way they want to spend time. So I told my brother-in-law, "I think they want you to paint their nails." So we did. There's a lot of fingernail polish on their hands, probably a lot less on their fingernails. But no one was running across the street. So that was positive. So the third function, we've talked about escape, getting out of things. We've talked about attention, trying to get mom or dad or teacher or someone else to come over and talk to me. And the third reason why individuals engage in some of those problem behaviors is to get access to something that they want, to get access to video games. So I might hit my head or tear up items because then the teacher or mom or someone else comes over and gives me an item to calm down, right? Or again, this probably has never happened to anyone, but if you're a parent and you're leaving the grocery store, they put those impulse purchases right by the cash register, right? Candy bars and chips and all the stuff that you probably don't want your child to eat right before dinner. Grocery stores make it really, really hard for parents to take their kids, right? They definitely don't set individuals up for success. But your child starts by saying, "Excuse me, dear mother. Excuse me, dear father. May I please have this candy bar? I promise I'll still eat my dinner." And you're like, "Yeah, right. She doesn't eat her dinner anyway." Now, next thing you know, the child has gone from saying, "Excuse me, dear mom. Excuse me, dear dad," to saying, "Give me the candy bar now." And you're like, "No, honey. We need to have dinner first. We have plenty of snacks now." Next thing you know, the kid's throwing himself on the floor, tantruming, screaming, causing kind of a ruckus, holding up the cash register, and you're like, "Fine, just take the candy bar." Right? And again, what I talked about earlier is your child's going to be more likely to engage in the behavior that they did right before that reward got delivered. So next time they walk into a grocery store, rather than saying, "Excuse me, dear mother, excuse me, dear father," they might just throw themselves on the floor because that worked previously. So keep that in mind. So what does it look like? I just gave an example. But they might engage in problem behavior when transitioning away from a preferred activity. So those individuals that are at home right now doing virtual learning, it's 9 a.m. It's time for them to jump on their iPad and begin their first math lesson. So what do they have to do? They have to leave the TV or they have to leave their video games. But they begin to engage in those problem behaviors. Maybe they yell, maybe they drag their feet, maybe they engage in something a little bit more intense. But that might signify to you that they're doing it to keep watching the video game or keep watching the TV. They might engage in the problem behavior when they're told to put away an object. So I have my iPad out, or I have my video games or my iPhone or whatever technology or item the children like, and I'm told to put it away, and that's when I throw it across the room, or that's when I hit my brother. They might engage in the problem behavior when told no. So, hey mom, can I have the TV? Can I watch TV? No. Then they begin to escalate. Or if you're a teacher or you're a parent at home trying to be the teacher implementing virtual learning, they might continue to play with an object at their desk rather than paying attention to the teacher. So again, these are all things to look for. If you think your child, your student, the client you work with might be engaging in behavior to get access to something, this is what you should look for in the environment. So again, what should you not do? Don't allow extra time. If they engage in problem behavior, if they say, no, mom, that's stupid, or whatever it is, whatever the problem behavior is, maybe they throw an item, maybe they hit their brother, maybe they, if they're at a desk, they sit on the floor. Don't allow extra time with that item. Keep in mind, if you do that, again, you're going to reward the behavior that occurred right before saying, yes, you can have 5 more minutes. So when they appropriately put the toy away, you didn't say, yes, you can have 5 more minutes. When they asked for more time, you didn't say, yes, you can have 5 more minutes. It was when maybe they ripped up all the math worksheets or whatever they were supposed to do. You said, okay, you can have 5 more minutes. Again, what does the individual learn, the child learn, the student learn? Yes, I get more time when I do this. Don't give them an item to calm them down. And I know for a lot of students, it is an effective strategy. There's certain sensory items or just other, things in the environment that you can give them that kind of are calming. We all have that. A lot of people light candles. A lot of people listen to soft music. There's all sorts of kind of calming items. So give it to them ahead of time, right? If the student engages in problem behavior to get access to something, we don't want to deliver it following the problem behavior. We want to give it to them ahead of time, or we want to say, hey, this is available at this particular time. And then if a student tantrums when it's time to clean up an activity, or put away a video game, so hey, Josh, it's time to put away your video games, you can restrict that for the rest of the day. That is always an option. But what I also emphasize is if you do that, if you say, okay, no video games for the rest of the day, you can't get them again until tomorrow, which is a common practice, right? You're creating what I call a state of deprivation. Now that child knows they're not going to get it for an extended period of time. It's like if preferred items are so valuable to children. It's like as an adult, if I said, okay, you can't have any water or food past 8 p.m. because you have to get blood work tomorrow. What do most people do? They drink a ton of water and a ton of food right at 8 p.m. because we're creating a state of deprivation. So rather than restrict access all day, even though it's troublesome and difficult, you could set up opportunities to practice handing the item over appropriately. So, okay, you didn't give me the iPad appropriately during your first session with it. You get it again at 2. If you put it away appropriately, you'll get it again at 9, or whatever your schedule looks like. So you can restrict it for the rest of the day. And I know sometimes that's the only option because obviously you're pressed for time, or maybe the behavior that they engaged in was so destructive that you're not going to be able to handle it later in the day. But to the extent you can, give them multiple opportunities to practice relinquishing an item appropriately. But we also want to reward appropriately ending an activity, or transitioning appropriately, or accepting no. So you can always use those preferred items or activities as reinforcers for appropriate behavior. So, hey, you did a great job transitioning off the iPad or off the video games, or you did a great job sharing your snack or sharing your favorite toy with your sibling, with your brother. So in 15 minutes or at 1 o'clock or right before bed, whatever it is, you're going to get to use it again, right? We're going to try to reward that cooperative behavior. And one question I get from parents is, well, when should I offer it again? So kind of the rule of thumb is the older your child is, you can have a longer delay. But if you tell your 3-year-old that because they put away their toys appropriately, they can have them again at 8 p.m., that's meaningless, right? time to a 3-year-old, it doesn't mean anything. But maybe if you tell your 12-year-old, hey, you can have it again at 3 p.m., that means something. So again, for the younger students, the younger children, when you say you can access it again, you want to keep it within a reasonable period of time. The older the student, you might be able to delay it a little bit more. So again, what should you do? Back to those steps we talked about. You want to identify, teach, and reinforce that appropriate response. So again, calmly asking for the item, calmly asking for more time. You want to provide many opportunities, as I mentioned, to practice throughout the day. And again, another question I get is, I use that example when we were opening about the child in the grocery store that's saying, dear mother, dear father, I just want this Kit Kat bar. I just want this piece of candy. Well, obviously, they did it appropriately, but you can't buy them a candy bar every single time you go to the grocery store, right? Especially if you have multiple kids, and there's no way. So at that point, what we would talk about is possibly setting up either a reinforcement system or a behavioral contract. So, hey, Josh, I appreciate you asking so nicely, but we can't buy you a candy bar today. What we can do is, if you behave appropriately the next 3 times at the grocery store, then I'll get you a candy bar. And what we can do is we can set up a visual, we can have a check system. There's so many different ways to teach your child. But I understand that you can't buy your child a candy bar every time you go. But figure out what's appropriate, what's feasible for you. And again, the younger the child, the quicker they need to earn it. Typically the older the child that can understand that delay, then maybe you can space it out a little bit more. But again, that's called a behavior contract or a reinforcement system. So again, we talked about how you respond to it after it's already occurred, but how do you prevent it? Prepare the student. In 10 minutes, you're gonna have to turn off the computer. In 5 minutes, in 1 minute. You can use timers. If you look on Amazon these days, it used to be, maybe the old kitchen timer that dinged, or the contraption where the sand, like, I'm forgetting what it's called, the sand runs out. Now they make all sorts of visual timers for students of all ages and all cognitive abilities. A lot of students, that's not necessarily effective. They need a more visual timer. So there's so many different timers out there. You can use visual cues. So for example, you can put a green card on the computer and that signals go. The computer is now available. Or you can put a red card on the computer and that signals, nope, no matter how many times you ask, you're not going to get access to the computer. And again, we talked about consistency. It's so important that if that red card's on there, no matter what the student does, they don't gain access to the computer. But when the green card's there, if they ask appropriately, absolutely. And then, as I mentioned before, you can reinforce appropriately ending preferred activities. You can give them praise, you can give them extra minutes, you can give them an edible if that's what the student prefers, or you can also give them a token, a coin, a check mark, something else that maybe after they get a few, they can exchange later for more time. So we talked about the 3 primary functions. So escape, attention, and gaining access. One that I didn't touch on, and I just want to talk about it briefly for a minute, is the 4th function, which was sensory or automatic. So these are the individuals that engage in behavior because it feels good. So we do have some students that maybe bang their head or pick at scabs or do some other type of self-injurious behavior. Or maybe they make repetitive vocalizations, and it doesn't seem like any consequences in the environment are causing it to occur or causing it to reoccur. So I'm not going to go into specific details regarding how to prevent that or the consequences, because it's so individualized and it varies so much across individuals and clients. But if you do suspect that it might be automatically maintained and it's not necessarily something you're doing in the environment, ask yourself, don't do this, but ask yourself, would my child do it if they were alone in their room? Would they continue to engage in those vocalizations? Would they hit their head? Would they pick at their scabs? And if the answer is yes, then most likely it's automatically maintained. But if they wouldn't engage in that behavior if they were alone, then most likely the behavior is continuing to occur because of something that's happening in the environment, some social aspect of the world, whether it's attention or earning something or getting out of things. So just to conclude, I'll go back to the 5 steps to managing problem behavior. And we flew through this in under an hour and a half, and I realize it's not nearly as easy as it looks on paper. But what I can emphasize is be consistent. Even if the first strategy doesn't work, try it for a period of time, carry it out. At that point, make sure everyone's implementing it the same way, because if one person deviates from that response, if you set up something in the home and you say, okay, when it's time for math, we're not going to give Josh attention, then make sure that anyone that walks into your house does not give Josh attention for tearing up his paper. First, identify the function. Again, escape, attention, access to tangibles, using that ABC, antecedent behavior consequence analysis. Do not provide that reinforcer after the behavior. Do not give that attention. Do not allow that escape, and do not give them access to a preferred item. Try to teach and identify an alternative response. So asking for a break, raising their hand, asking for more time with an item. Again, I know this can be frustrating because typically the student's going to use it a lot at first, but it is a life skill. As adults, we can all say, excuse me, I would like to talk to you. Or, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed in this situation. I need a break. Or, hey, I'm thirsty. I need water, right? So asking for those things appropriately is a life skill that's going to be beneficial for your child, for your student, for your client throughout their entire life. Make sure you teach and reinforce that alternative response. And make sure when you reinforce or reward it, it's quicker than you would the problem behavior. So again, back to that example, I'm raising my hand, I'm raising my hand, I'm raising my hand, and my teacher isn't saying anything to me, or my dad's not saying anything to me. But as soon as I hit my brother or hit my classmate, everyone comes running over to me. That was so quick, that was so effective. They're going to be more likely to engage in the behavior that gets them the quicker response. And again, anticipate and work to prevent that maladaptive, that problem behavior. So we talked a lot about proactive strategies. For escape maintain behavior, set up a break. Tell them what they're working towards. Teach them how to request a break. For attention, let them know how to gain attention. If it's access, again, use timers, use visuals. There's so many proactive strategies. And if we only rely on those consequences, your day is going to be exhausting. I'm a behavior analyst. I work with students most of the day. Typically, those consequences that we implement take a lot more effort and a lot more time. Now, don't get me wrong. You're going to have to implement them. But implementing some of those proactive strategies makes the day a lot smoother. We're still going to have issues. We're still going to have problems. But if I only relied on those consequence strategies, I would go home every day exhausted. Those proactive strategies set the student, the child, up for success. That is all we have. We have about 10 minutes. If anyone has, I did see someone mention in the chat box about the slides, and I think, Jan, you did say that you would send those out.
Yes, I'll be sending them out either later today or early next week.
Perfect. Does anyone have any questions or anything that I might need to go into detail a little bit more about? If you have a question, you can either type it into the chat box or unmute yourself. And, if not, I'm happy to share the slides, and I'm happy to share my email address if you'd like to ask questions individually. But I definitely appreciate everyone for participating. Again, Jan and Rhonda, thank you so much for hosting this and putting it together. And I hope everyone has a great Friday and weekend. So I guess I'll turn it over to you, Jan, if you have any closing remarks.
Okay, if no one else has questions, then I will share. Thank you, Ellen, for letting me know that I could share your email address also. I will include that in my email to everyone when I send out the slides a link to an evaluation. You'll get a certificate and a link to the recording when I send that out. So thank you all for attending. Do you have anything else, Rhonda?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you all for coming.
Mhm.
Thank you, Ellen, for coming and presenting. It's a lot of great information.
Absolutely.
Always enjoy having you, Ellen.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.